So this lovely looking Gantt chart is for a 6-month project for a fairly complex GIS web mapping application, and just one web mapping application. So what we have here is a series of meetings to gather requirements from each of the different business units. Quite a bit of development time there for meeting these requirements, some testing time, and then rolling that application through the development, staging and production environments, some training time, and more than likely more meetings to discuss budgets and further enhancements. And all of this, as you can see here, costs time and money, and I do understand that organizations need to implement fairly complex systems, and these processes are in place so that you can minimize risk and ensure that the job's done right. But when talking about just the web applications, I personally think we need to shift our approach for rolling out web apps within an organization. If you think about apps on your phone, you've got lots of focused apps that are available for specific tasks. And think about how disposable these apps can be as well. I've installed an app, used it, and deleted it, all within the space of a train journey to work. Do you actually need to build an all-encompassing solution with a strategy to keep expanding it? Perhaps break that huge scope that you have into much smaller scopes of work that can be met by multiple focused web applications that can be actually rustled up in no time and accessed by more users within your organization. Now that leads nicely onto Web AppBuilder, which will help you achieve these goals. It allows you to build powerful web apps with a simple configuration builder, and these apps are going to run across not only your desktop browser in your office, but right the way through to your smartphone in your pocket. And there's no plugins like Flex or Silverlight, it's pure JavaScript. There's support for touch gestures and a responsive design, meaning that the app is going to adjust itself to best fit the screen size hitting it. Now on the left we have a portal, and the next speaker will be talking about that in more detail. So this can be ArcGIS Online, or it can be portal for ArcGIS. Web AppBuilder is embedded into both of those. Now with this portal, you can create web maps, and then from there you can share those web maps to the web application templates embedded into portals. So that's things that John was showing earlier. And these apps are great. They are targeted at delivering a small scope of work and presenting it really well so that users with no GIS experience can make use of them to get the answers they need very quickly. But sometimes as a publisher, you might want to build more powerful and more interactive apps that give the users a bit more flexibility and interactivity with the data in those web maps. Now when sharing your web maps, you can actually choose to launch the application builder to start creating these more I'm not going to say complex, but more interactive apps. So I'll walk you through building a couple of apps. So in this fictional scenario, we have a flood, and the claims management team would like to whip up a quick app that allows them to cross-compare flood damage claims with the flood extents. They'd also like some analysis tools to help pinpoint potential bogus flood claims. So here we have some claims information from the policyholders. So let's say that this data set is dynamically changing as new phone calls are coming into the claims team. The blue marker, it's a policyholder that has raised a flood claim. The orange marker's policyholder that has not raised a flood claim. We've also got some flood extent information for 1 in 5 and 1 in 100 year flood events. And with this web map, we want to share it. We don't want to share it with everyone, we just want to share it with the claims management team, create a web app. Now these app templates, there's not one particular one that actually meets all of the requirements laid out by the claims management team. So to do that, I'm going to launch the application builder. Now the first step is to choose a theme for your application. So a theme dictates the layout and the styling of the app. Later we'll talk about how you can design your own themes. We'll see more themes put in here from Esri over time. I'm going to go for this tab-based theme, and we'll stick to black, and we'll also keep the widgets in the default location. Now the widgets tab is where you'll spend most of your time, and this is where you wrap the functionality around the application. I've already got a couple of widgets set up here for the legend, fairly self-explanatory, and a table of contents. You can turn layers on and off from here. You can adjust the transparency of layers if you so wish. You can move layers up and down and reorder layers within the table of contents. Quite a powerful one is showing the attribute table, and you can configure what layers you can toggle the attribute table on and off for, or just turn it off altogether. So I can sort on damage and find the claim with the most damage associated with it. Filter the attribute table down to the current map extent, so that takes us from 260 down to 6. And if I wanted to, even export these 6 records out to a CSV. I'm going to wrap some additional functionality around this. Let's say I want a swipe tool, enable that, configure it. I want it to be a vertical bar and swipe out the flood extent layer. So if I was looking in town, I can then toggle on this swipe to get an idea of what's underneath that flood extent with this swipe, just like you would with the swipe tool in good old ArcGIS for desktop. Temporal new, let's have a look. These two ones are quite handy as well, so maybe not now, but if I was out in the field trying to knock on the door of these policyholders, where am I? Find my location, and that'll actually zoom to your current location. Any point you want to return back, default extent. Now, I want to add in some additional widgets. I want a base map gallery. So part of the requirements are, look, we love the Esri base maps, but for this particular organization, we don't actually want them. We only want the user to toggle between the Vic map aerials and the Vic map traditional map, because that's what our organization uses. Custom base maps, not a problem. Yep. And the main widget that's going to meet the requirements for this app is going to be the analysis widget. So we're going to add this in, and we're not going to add in all of the tools. The tools that they're going to need to meet those requirements are, what do we have a look? Let's find existing locations. That allows the end user to actually build a query client side, and find nearest. They also want to use that, and if we've got time, we'll also look at planning routes. So before we look at that, let's just save this and jump into the preview mode. So this allows me to actually emulate what this app's going to look like and behave like on different devices. So if you're lucky enough to have the new iPhone, you can have a look and play around with how it's going to behave on this device. If you know, these are just the common types of devices, but you can put in your own screen size here, and you'll just see how the app behaves differently as you change the. So if we jump to like a small iPhone 4, we'll see as we kind of click a pop-up, it behaves a little bit differently. It kind of shows it in this full screen mode. iPhone 4, wow. So we're looking at it in the builder mode at the moment. So let's actually launch and see what this looks like in full screen mode. You know what? Let's not do that. One step I did miss was just some final last touches. We're going to remove the subtitle. We're going to change the app logo to be a nice flood logo. We can add in links here like contact support or back to your intranet website. So we'll save that, and then we'll launch it in full screen mode. So here we are in full screen mode of the application, and as a member of the flood claims department, I'm just going to jump straight in and start to use the analysis tools that I've supplied. So up here I can click the analysis tools widget, and I can even, as an end user, get a bit more information about how each of these tools runs via the pop-up. Now the first step I want to do is run the find existing locations. I want to perform this on the policyholders layer, and what I want to do is I want to build a query. I can build whatever query I want, and that's quite powerful for the end user, but in this instance I want to know, alright, where are those policyholders that are not intersecting the current flood extents. Not only that, I want to add another expression where the policyholders, this time an attribute query, not a spatial query, where the flood claim is equal to 1, and 1 means they have made a flood claim. So what we're doing is, because this is an AND clause, they are not within the flood extent, but they have made a flood claim, so potentially a bit bogus. We'll call the resulting claim claims not in flood extent, and we'll go off and run that analysis. So ArcGIS Online will perform the analysis and create a brand new layer and then add it to the application. You can still use the application whilst it's doing this analysis, so potentially if you've got larger layers, it can take a bit of time, but it can just minimize this and continue to use other widgets. But once it's finished this, if we jump into the table of contents, we can now see, if we turn off previous layer, these blue markers are policies that have claimed for flood damage but are not within the flood extent. So let's take this a step further and run the Find Nearest tool. And we're going to perform this on the layer that was just created, and we're going to find which of those, how far away is the nearest flood extent. And we can use a number of different distances, but in this case it makes sense to use the straight line distance. And we're just going to find the first one that it encounters, and we're not going to limit the search range. And again, we'll just run that analysis. And what we're doing here is, perhaps one of those policyholders is only 30 meters away from the flood extent, so potentially is still okay. But you might find one that's a couple of kilometers away, which is definitely very suspicious. So again, this is creating a brand new layer, adding some attributes on the end of the policyholders layer as well. So that's succeeded. Adds the new layers in here, so we can open up this is showing us the nearest bit of flood extent it's found, but what we're interested in is these connecting lines. We can open up the attribute table. If we scroll to the end, we can sort the straight line distance to show the highest one, and we can zoom to these records and just minimize some of these. This one is just under a kilometre away from the flood extent. What's going on here is something definitely a bit suspicious. We'll just do one more step, and we're going to do the plan routes. So here we can say, alright, well, for those claims not in the flood extent, we want to send out a couple of field staff to go check out those and assess those potential bogus claims. So we'll do driving distance, and let's say we have a depot in town somewhere, we'll just say here, and they're going to be starting work tomorrow morning at let's say 8 AM, and there are 2 field officers that we're going to be sending out in some pool vehicles, and we only want them to do a maximum of 15 stops, and let's say they're going to spend at least 30 minutes each one to do an assessment. We can then run that analysis. This will go off and do some advanced routing to determine the best route for each of those field officers to accommodate going to visit each of those potentially bogus claims, and it'll even return driving directions. And you can, I won't do it in this demo, but you can take it a step further and start pushing that information down to perhaps the collector client for them to actually then go off and visit these stops. So that's performed that routing. We can jump to the table of contents again, and we'll turn off the flood extent. We can see that it's worked out well for the highly densely populated area. We're just going to have the one field operator go out and do a large number of stops, but for the ones that are a bit further out of field, the other field operator will go visit less stops but further distance away. So application number 2 is going to be for the underwriting team, and they want to better understand how crash black spots might affect a policy. So right now how they do this is they have a GIS analyst who has built together a tool within desktop that helps determine if they have knowledge that a policyholder uses their car to get from their work address to their home address and use it for commuting, and this tool will take into account the shortest path between those 2 addresses during a commuter time and pull up any accidents, again specifically accidents that have happened within the commuter time window. And this helps the analyst then decide, alright, is this a high risk policy or a low risk policy, depending on the number of accidents in any black spot areas. So they wanted to make this tool more accessible to the web audience, and this is the model that does this magic. And on the left is the input parameter of the home and work address, and that's all the user needs to enter in. In the middle it calculates the shortest route. It then intersects this with the crash data, and the final outputs are the route itself and any crashes along that route. So this has been served up to ArcGIS for Server, and that geoprocessing service has been registered with the portal. I am simply going to add in a new widget for geoprocessing. I'm going to call the geoprocessing task black spot tool. Change the icon. Now this is quite clever. So we're going to point it to, can point it directly to a GP service URL, but I've already registered this in ArcGIS Online. This toolbox only has the calculate black spots tool in it. And Web AppBuilder is clever enough to go, all right, well, we know what inputs and outputs this model requires. The input stops, so we'll put home and work address, and we'll make the marker a nice big green flag. And then the output, we can look at the routes. Happy to have it as a green line. I don't want there to be a pop-up for it. And then the crashes, I'm going to choose a size-based symbol, and the reason I'm doing this is I know that there's a unit number, and this is the number of, for each of those crashes, a number of vehicles that were actually involved in that crash. So the maximum number is around about 8. Break that into 4 classes. That now gives us different symbol for more vehicles being involved. I'll leave it at that. I think maybe a bit anal here. Layer order. Make sure the crashes are on top of the routes. We've got more options here. Like if this was a complex result, like an imagery or raster analysis, I could actually draw the results in a separate map service. But I'm going to draw it in the graphics layer so I can work with it in another query. So from here, I can run the black spot tool, and I can say, all right, let's say down in, not quite sure what a big commute is, so I could tap in the geocoder, a work address and a home address, but to save time, I'm just going to tap in a couple of locations. I live in Devonport, work in Launceston. Go ahead and calculate the shortest route between those two and pull back any crashes along that route. From here, it gives me those crashes along that route. I could even take this further, and there's charting widgets, so I could say, all right, well, based on that, I have a charting widget that then shows me a breakdown of those crashes and the number, like some stats around that, but I haven't got time to go into that. But again, taking that desktop tool, serving up to Web AppBuilder in the space of, what, 4 minutes? Pretty good. So for any developers out there, you still might want to jump into the code and customize AppBuilder further, and that's fine. Web AppBuilder has a development framework. With the essence of time, in the simplest terms, it can be separated out into designing themes and designing widgets. So, as I mentioned earlier, designing themes is the look and feel of the apps. So, it's not just the colors and the fonts and the where things are placed in the template, but it's also the behaviors. You know, you can actually add in CSS animation effects, and all of that logic can be put into a theme, which then end users can then choose and configure further depending on what you allow them to configure. On the other side, you have widgets. So widgets is the functionality, and if the out-of-the-box widgets don't meet your business requirements, you can develop new ones. And what we tend to find is widgets, you know, they'll probably do most of what you need, but you might just want to extend a widget. You might want to take the editor widget and add a few additional tasks on top of it that are specific to your business logic. What we see on the screen is the imagery widgets. These allow the end user to perform, in this case, a supervised classification. So supervised classifications in the browser using Landsat imagery. It's pretty impressive, really. This one allows the user to manipulate the renderer of an image service. So in this case, choosing to display the Landsat 8 imagery with an NDVI to highlight vegetation. I haven't got time to show a lot of these custom widgets, but I'm quite adamant that I don't think you should be starting from scratch building web applications anymore. You can use the web application builder that likely does 80 to 90% of what you need already, and then any remaining scope that you have can be developed on top of that with custom widgets and custom themes. Our PS team have already built a number of widgets that do things like integrate with other business systems like asset management systems, and also some, again, customized editing workflows, working with web APIs. If you've got any interest in this, or perhaps you've got some legacy apps that you might want to transition to Web AppBuilder, but there's some functionality that you think's missing, come talk to us on the Arc Bar, and we can discuss how we can do that. Esri also make these apps these widgets and themes available on GitHub. They also encourage you to share your widgets and themes to the same GitHub repository. It's just a nice way of sharing and getting access to that code and forking it to do your own things on top of it. The next version of Web AppBuilder is going to have 3D support, so this will support the 3D scene services from ArcGIS Server, along with the web scenes that you can dish out from CityEngine and ArcGIS Pro. And again, for developers out there, you'll be able to develop custom widgets that actually work with this 3D content. So that's all I've got time for in this session, but assuming this ends up on a blog post, please use the comments below this blog post to raise any questions. Thanks.